Welcome everyone to our next installation of our coffee break webinar, Moving Beyond a Requirement, a framework to maximize the full benefits of program evaluation. One of the things that you may have noticed in this increasingly data age that we live in is that there's an increasing role of program evaluation. We have some evidence to that anecdotally that program evaluation is playing a more important role. One, if you just look at solicitations. In a lot of federally grant-funded projects, there's more and more references to program evaluation. Another anecdotal piece of evidence is looking at the fact that there was an Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018. And this act requires all federal agencies to have a chief evaluation officer and to develop learning agendas and annual evaluation plans. And while quantitative data is limited, it's also suggestive of a similar trend. And looking at the State of Evaluation report produced by the Innovation Network, in 2010, about 85% of individuals indicated that program evaluation was a key component of their work in terms of some type of grant-funded or nonprofit work. In 2016, that response rate had increased to 92%. And I would guess if that survey was disseminated now, that percent increase would be even greater. One of the questions that we have to ask, though, is why? Why is program evaluation playing a greater role? What are the reasons? What's motivating this? And one way to think about this is if we take a broader view and thinking about this idea of what I think of as the promise. Each field has a promise that it's offering society, and program evaluation is no exception. So let me show you what I mean by this. So if you think about medicine, the promise that medicine provides is that it's going to treat sick individuals and keep individuals healthy. If you think about the legal profession, that the promise of the legal profession is that it's ensuring to protect the rights of individuals and entities. And program evaluation also has a promise as well. And the promise of program evaluation is essentially saying that it's producing evidence of how public resources are impacting on societal challenges. And yet, when thinking about that promise promise can only be fulfilled when certain kind of characteristics are actually met. And that's really the focus of today's webinar. So today, there are a couple of things that we want to do together. One, we want to assess the evaluation needs based on the solicitation and project team's learning needs. Then we also want to talk about and getting an understanding of what are the competency areas for an evaluator. We're then going to take those two pieces together to create a framework for how to maximize the benefits or the promise of program evaluation. And as always, we want to make sure that we're answering your questions. So if you don't know me, I am Lana Rux, Principal Consultant of the Rux Group. And the Rux Group is a research and program evaluation firm that gathers, analyzes, and interprets data to enable our clients to measure the impact of their work. And this year, we have the privilege of celebrating 15 years in operations. And over the past 15 years, we really have had the joy of working with a number of entities, primarily higher education institutions, on federally funded grants funded by agencies such as the National Science Foundation, Department of Education, and the Department of Labor. And also with me today is Elise Hope, so I will turn things over to her for a moment for her to be able to share her role on the webinar today. Elise?
Yeah, thank you, Lana, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elise Hopes, and I am the Outreach Coordinator with the Rux Group. For today's webinar, I'll be helping to moderate some of the Q&A portions that are sprinkled throughout the webinar. So as you may have questions emerge, feel free to use that question feature on the right side of your screen. It's denoted by that little question mark symbol. And we'll do our best to answer your questions during each of those segments. But I should mention too that there is just a little bit of a delay from when you send in your questions and when we receive them on our end. So if we don't get it to your question at that segment, we'll be sure to try at the next segment, and any questions that we don't get to during the webinar, we'll be sure to follow up in email. There's also a chat feature that's just below that question feature. And just a little caveat about that, that feature will only show up when there's a new message for you to review. So be sure to be on the lookout for that one as well. I think with that, Lana, that's everything. And so we can go ahead and dive in.
All right. Thanks, Elise. So let's go ahead and get to the meat of today's webinar by first talking about the project evaluation needs. And thinking about the project evaluation needs, there are really two components. They reflect the funder's expectations, so at least understanding what the requirements are, but then also the project needs reflect what the project is going to need to learn from the evaluation in order to meet the outlined objectives. So let's first talk about the funder expectations, or first just get an understanding of how you understand what the actual requirements are about for the evaluation. So the first component is that you want to make sure that you're really searching through the solicitation. And that may sound slightly self-evident, but it's really important that you take a concerted look at the solicitation for information related to the evaluation. And so one of the ways to be able to do that is that actually doing a search of the term. What I do is eval with UA at the end of it so that it will pick up on words related to evaluation as well as about the evaluator. And one of the reasons why I suggest that you just do a concerted look around information related to the evaluation or the evaluator is just depending on the solicitation, that information can be really dispersed throughout that document. So it may not just be contained in one area, but just really spread throughout the solicitation. So you want to make sure that you are making a concerted effort to, as soon as possible, understand what the expectations are, because the expectations can relate to what the funding is, how much money you can spend on the evaluation, as well as just in regards to what other types of, the timing and being able to make sure that you have an individual that that you may need to identify, and being able to have enough time to be able to respond to what that information is as you're putting your proposal together. The other component that you want to make sure that you're looking at as well is just reviewing the program webpage for additional information. And this is particularly important if you're dealing with perhaps a newer program, because what I've seen with some funding agencies with some newer programs, there's a lot of updates and a lot of clarification around the program overall, but specifically related to the evaluation. So you want to make sure that you're staying current and that you're really making sure that you're staying on top of what the funders are expecting in terms of the evaluation. So as I was starting to get to before, what are some of those common expectations around the evaluation? Well, one expectation can really be in regards to knowledge generation. And knowledge generation is really in regards to how the evaluation findings or how findings are actually contributing to a broader body of knowledge. And sometimes the evaluation is expected to fill a knowledge generation component, so you want to be made aware of that. The other piece, too, is in regards to, is there an emphasis on continuous improvement? And that's really the focus of the evaluation findings, is how is the project team going to use the findings to help with implementation and the changes with the project? And I would say that even if the solicitation doesn't highlight continuous improvement, that's something that you will want to make sure that you include within the evaluation. But if that is identified in the solicitation, you just want to make sure you're emphasizing and making sure you're really telling the reviewers in the grant proposal how the evaluation findings are going to be used. The other component that we often see as part of expectations are really being able to identify success metrics. So having specific metrics or indicators of success at different stages, you want to make sure that you're articulating that. If you're the project team writing this component, you may want to make sure that whoever's responsible for the evaluation, that they're involved in that conversation as well to help really think through what would be appropriate at different stages. And then the last piece, again, what I was starting to allude to earlier, is that sometimes the solicitation will say that you need to identify an independent or external evaluator right in the evaluation plan. And if that's the case, then you want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to be able to identify someone who will be a right fit for that project. So those are some of the aspects of the funder expectations. What about thinking about the project team needs? One of the ways to start thinking about what the needs are for the project team is just thinking about the project as a small and a larger undertaking. And that's kind of a good frame, a good initial way to think about the variation in projects. But there's also a couple of different additional dimensions that you can examine a project by to say, is it small or is it large? And one dimension is in regards to the nature of the intervention itself. So is that intervention something that is less newly developed in terms of its initiatives, or is it something that's more newly developed? So you can kind of conceptualize that in terms of, is it being replicated? Is it something that's being adapted? Something that's already existed, but you're putting into a new context? That's kind of could be smaller. Or is it something that's really unique, something that's relatively underdeveloped, and that you're going to have to figure out how to fully implement? Another dimension to consider in terms of thinking about various dimensions of projects and understanding what the needs are to be able to understand what you need to learn is in regards to the complexity of the systems. So are there less systems that are involved in implementing the project, or are there a large number of systems? So thinking about a small number of systems, maybe the project just involves one department. And even within one department, that it's one subject matter, more contained. Or is this an initiative that involves multiple departments, multiple institutions, and is a multi-site initiative? In that case, as you can see, that's just going to impact on a lot of different systems. So you want to think about that in terms of the aspects of the project and what the project team may actually need. A final dimension is in regards to just thinking about the extent of the shared vision. Is there less divergence of the vision or more convergence, or is there just kind of more divergence? So everyone is thinking about the initiative in a really different way. And one way to kind of think about this is that in terms of project planning, is everyone on the same board and really was able to kind of share ideas about how to approach the initiative? Or was there less opportunity to be able to work together as a larger team in terms of the proposal development? And that's something that's going to have to occur after the project is actually implemented. And I should say, if you want more information in that regards in terms of how the project is being developed during the grant application development phase, I would suggest that you go to one of our webinars, Don't Tell Me I Have to Write That, and really talk about how do you create that alignment during the proposal writing component. And I should also say, in terms of thinking about the various dimensions of a small and large project, I also suggest that you go to one of our coffee break webinars and the three-part formula in which we talk about that dimension, those dimensions of whether it's a small project or a large project, and how do you approach writing an evaluation plan depending on the size of that initiative as a resource for you. So let me pause there and see if there are any questions at this point. Elise?
Yeah, we do have a question. In identifying a project as small or large, does it need to meet each one of those requirements?
And I think in terms of, is it like, does it have to be like a replication or something that's being adaptive? Does it have to be something that there's convergence in a vision or in regards to it having less complexity? Not necessarily. I think that, I share those dimensions really to help in terms of thinking about how to, as a conceptual kind of framework, and thinking about the various sizes of an initiative, but it doesn't necessarily land completely neatly into those categories. We've seen where there have been replications or projects that are adapting another initiative that's been multi-site, and in that context, it can still be complex. So there's also kind of a gut level reaction that you can take to say, no, this is kind of more complex, and this is a little less complex, a little larger, a little smaller. And also, one of the points that we bring up in the three-part series webinar in terms of understanding whether it's small or large is also the dollar amount. So the dollar amount of the grant also shows is an indication of if it's small or large. And so maybe that helps in thinking about how to make that determination. So I'm going to go ahead and go on to the next point, and then if there are additional questions, we can go to those pieces as well. So the next point in terms of trying to understand and go beyond the requirements is understanding the competency areas of the evaluator. And so those competency areas really involve a myriad of capabilities, skills, and expertise to effectively plan and implement an evaluation. And so in thinking about those competency areas, one place that often gets referred to is the American Evaluation Association guiding principles. And guiding principles, I think sometimes whether they're endorsed or not endorsed, are used as a proxy variable around what the evaluator's capabilities or competencies are. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that the American Evaluation Association actually through a rather large-scale effort distill down what evaluation competencies are, and creating 5 different areas to be able to focus in on. And this involved a lot of different conversations across multiple different stakeholders to be able to have some understanding of what are the competencies and what are those areas that evaluators should bring to their work. So let me go over those for a moment. And there really are, like I said, 5 different areas. The first is in regards to methodology. The second is in regards to context. The third is interpersonal skills. Fourth, planning and management, and the fifth, practice is practice and professional practice. So in regards to methodology, the first one is in regards to technical aspects of evidence-based systematic inquiry for value purposes. So there's a lot of emphasis that's placed on methodology. I think that's one of the areas that there's a lot of understanding in regards to what evaluators should be able to do and what skills they should be able to bring to the work. And I think in terms of context, that's another one that there's a real understanding in regards to what skills individuals should bring or what types of experiences they should bring to the work. And context really is in regards to understanding the unique circumstances, multiple perspectives, and changing settings of evaluation. But I think in regards to interpersonal skills, that's one area where there's a little less emphasis placed on this. And that's in regards to human relations and social interactions that ground evaluator effectiveness for professional practice. And one of the ways that you can kind of think of that is just in regards to the way that the evaluator can create a space that is psychologically safe for the project team. Another area that maybe doesn't get emphasized quite as much is in regards to determining and monitoring work plans, timelines, resources, and other components. It's just that planning and management. How is the evaluator planning and how are they managing the evaluation initiative? And then the final component is in regards to professional practice. And professional practice is really in regards to understanding what makes an evaluator a distinct and practicing professional. So those are kind of the 5 different areas in terms of thinking about what an evaluator competency should have. So before I start piecing these things together, let me just pause there to see if there are any additional questions.
Yes, there are. I wasn't aware of the evaluator competencies. Where can I go to find these?
The evaluator competencies are actually on the American Evaluation Association website, but we will also post them on our website too. So if you just give us a couple of days, if you visit our hub, you'll be able to find information about the guiding principles as well as the evaluator competencies as well. I think, let me just go ahead to the next portion and then to make sure I can get through that piece, and then I will pause again to make sure that I'm answering any other questions. And as Elise said, if we don't get to all the questions during the webinar, I will make sure to answer those questions afterwards. So let's now focus actually on piecing it all together. And in terms of actually trying to understand a framework to move beyond the requirements, that involves identifying the evaluation entity that's bringing the right competencies that are meeting the project evaluation needs. So pushing those 2 things together. So let's see how that works. So we talked about that you want to make sure that you're understanding the project's evaluation needs. And just to make things simple, we're talking about that in terms of a small or a larger project. Then the other piece that we talked about are the various different evaluation competencies. And so the first one that we talked about was in regards to methodology. And when you're thinking about a smaller project, that the right evaluator in terms of just thinking about if that project is smaller is so they have that targeted methodological experience and expertise. So related to that specific, perhaps it's specific topic area, related to the particular program and funding source. Whereas if it's something that's larger, you may want an individual who's able to bring a broader methodological experience and expertise to the work. And that's in part because it's broader, more complex. You may not be aware of what the specific needs are at the onset. So if you have someone who has that broader methodological experience, they would be able to meet that need. And it's not necessary for a smaller project. Context. Well, again, in the same idea that you may want to have someone who make sure that they have that very specific current context experience. And for a larger project, you may want to have someone with a much more diverse set of contexts and experiences, again, for the same reason that I talked to in terms of the methods and the methodological approach, because they may need to bring that to bear to whatever may emerge within the project. And the personal skills, that with a smaller project, you want individuals who are able to effectively communicate and interact with the project team. But perhaps with a larger project, you may also want someone who has skills around consultation and can also serve as a thought partner. Then in terms of planning and management with a smaller project, that their systems and processes are in place to be able to manage a small scale evaluation effort. And then in the same vein, that you want systems and processes that can be used to manage a large scale evaluation effort. And then with professional practice, for both small or large, you want someone who is really connected to the professional evaluation field. So let me pause there and see if there's any additional questions.
Yeah, there are a few. So one is, this seems like a lot to think about. Is there anything shorter?
I would say so one of the goals I think of a grant, it's one is to be able to receive the funding, to be able to execute a vision and to realize that and to really address some of the wicked challenges that we're experiencing on a societal level. It's kind of the broader goal. But I think also on a micro level, the goal is to build grant capacity and evaluation capacity. And so I think that thinking about projects in this way helps to serve to build grant and evaluation capacity so that right now it may feel like a lot, and I do understand, project teams have so much on their plates, but the more that you think about the projects in this way, I think will help you to more fully realize what your vision is with that initiative, and really, again, to really be able to leverage the full value of the evaluation. So I think over time, it will seem like less. And again, if you're partnering with an evaluation entity, they will be able to work with you and help you and support you through that process. So is there, I think, maybe time for another question?
Yes, we can do one more. So what tips can you share for building a culture of evaluation among your team?
That's a really good question. And actually, I think it's a great segue for our next webinar that we're going to host. But I think that in part, building a culture involves valuing the evaluation. So, how are you treating the evaluation during the proposal phase? Is the evaluator selected? Is the evaluator able to help in terms of really crafting out that evaluation plan, giving some feedback on the initiative itself, only because as you are trying to develop the evaluation plan, you have questions about the initiative. And so those questions help, I think, to strengthen out what you're actually proposing. And then when the grant's actually awarded, are you using the evaluation results? Or are you treating the evaluation, just give me a report, I'm going to send it in with our annual report. But if you're actually using the evaluation, I think that helps to really build a culture around the importance of evaluation. So our time is almost over. This time goes by so quickly, and just have a couple of wrap-up items. First, just want to kind of give a summary of what we've talked about already. So the one piece is just in regards to really be able to move beyond the requirements of what evaluation is. You want to make sure that you're assessing the evaluation needs to understand the funder's expectations, but also understanding what the project team is going to need to learn from the evaluation effort. You also should just understand what the various areas of competencies that evaluators should be bringing to the work. And as I tried to emphasize, it's more than just in methods and in context. There are these other elements that are important to you that an evaluator can bring to the work. And then finally, marrying those two together, understanding what the evaluation entity is bringing, and then also understanding the project needs. And I should say too, is that evaluation person or entity doesn't necessarily mean that it's one type of person that works with small projects and another type of person that works with large projects. It could be the same person, but just understanding in that context what is actually going to be needed. So I have one more reference for you. Suggest that you visit our webinar on 5 best practices for hiring the right evaluation partner. This is also on our website if you want to visit that and look at that webinar. And then also mark your calendars for July 27th, where we'll have our next webinar that's called Change Your Mind, Change Your Project, Adopting a Growth Mindset for Annual Reporting. So with that, I hope everyone has a really fabulous day, and it was just an absolute joy to be with you today. Thank you so much.